For my presentation, I'll be discussing mass incarceration in the U.S. Switch slides. First, I wanted to give an overview of what I'll be discussing in this presentation. I'll first go over the ethical situation regarding mass incarceration in the U.S., then the moral dilemmas that are present within it. I'll discuss some relevant moral concepts from Mill that apply to this topic, and then I will follow a utilitarian moral evaluation, and then I'll provide possible solutions according to Mill's utilitarianism and on liberty. Switch to the next slide. So to start, what is mass incarceration? I'm sure most of you know or have heard of this phrase, but to put it simply, it just refers to the fact that the U.S. incarcerates more people in the world than any other nation. The U.S. also has the highest prison population rate in the world. I think the best way to describe this is through a statistic. The U.S. has 5% of the world's population, and the U.S. also has 25% of the world's prisoners, which means 1 in 4 prisoners in the entire world are locked up here in the U.S., the quote-unquote land of the free. There is 2.3 million people in prison today just in America, and the approach to punishment in this country disproportionately affects minorities, inflicts overly harsh sentences without adequate options for probation or parole, and often lacks public safety rationale. Change slide. The moral dilemmas present in this issue is that it's inhumane, unsustainable, and as well as the fact that there are for-profit prisons in the U.S., and it's also a racial issue. Change slide. It's inhumane because prisoners are crowded into cells suffering from inadequate health care and receiving inadequate nutrition. There's also mental health effects that come from over-incarceration. Change slides. On top of this, it's unsustainable. It's costing billions of tax dollars. It's costing taxpayers billions of dollars while doing very little to prevent crime. There's also private prisons in the U.S. that profit from mass incarceration and often contribute to politicians' campaign, who then in return move forth policies that lead to higher incarceration rates, as well as overly harsh sentences so that they have to stay there. This often is referred to the prison industrial complex, which describes the attribution of the rapid expansion of the U.S. inmate population to the political influence of private prison companies and businesses to supply goods and services to government prison agencies for profit. CCA, Corrections Corporation America, is a for-profit company that owns and manages private prisons in the U.S. and has a net profit of $1.7 billion. Change slides. When discussing the moral dilemmas attached to mass incarceration, I also think it's incredibly important to mention that this mass incarceration disproportionately affects people of color and those in the LGBTQ community and the poor. Change slides. The relevant moral concepts for Mill is the greatest happiness principle. The greatest happiness principle is kind of an egalitarian way of ethics because it seeks to find the greatest amount of happiness altogether, not just one's own individual happiness. So it counts essentially, everyone counts for one. It also considers quantity and quality of pleasures or happiness. Change slides. The theory does not limit itself to the pursuit of happiness, but also to the prevention of unhappiness. And utilitarianism looks purely at the consequence of an action and settles on the option that reduces the most suffering. Change slides. In Mill's On Liberty, he lays out the importance of liberty and the specific freedoms people are entitled to, including the freedom of thought, opinion, life plan, and more. Mill also believes that life without liberty is so unhappy that it outweighs any other pains. Mill also adds on Liberty this idea of first and second generation rights. First generation rights are referring to the norms of fulfillment of basic needs, such as nutrition and healthcare, and second generation rights is referring to socioeconomic needs. Change slides. So how would Mill evaluate the issue of mass incarceration through utilitarianism and on liberty? Change slides. Mill would take on the ethical problem of mass incarceration through utilitarianism by first using the value theory to show that the only thing that is truly valuable is happiness or the well-being of people and the absence of suffering. Then he would assess the reform towards less mass incarceration in America would maximize expected happiness. And so then it becomes this utilitarian calculus of evaluating whether or not those who are benefiting from mass incarceration are happier, or rather their quality of happiness is higher than those who are suffering because of it. And those who benefit from mass incarceration in the U.S. are benefiting mainly because it's extremely lucrative. So I believe that the derivative value of money that then causes people happiness is far less valuable than the amount of unhappiness of the prisoners who are stripped of their liberties and are living under unfit conditions, especially when you supplement this with on liberty, where Mill states how liberty is the highest of pleasures and the absence of liberty outweighs other pains. Mill would also take into the consideration that those living outside of prison with a loved one trapped within, and add that to the amount of suffering that's being caused by mass incarceration. Especially when you consider the first and second generation rights, there's a clear violation of their rights because they're being treated inhumanely. I'm sure someone could make a case that happiness in America is higher overall because there's less crime, since so many people are in prison, but crime in America has not gone down in the past decade, even though the prison population has increased so rapidly. Mass incarceration should be remedied in America according to the greatest happiness principle, especially when recognizing the disproportionate amount of African Americans imprisoned in the U.S. facing longer sentences than their white counterparts, and the equality of punishment would also lead to a greater amount and quality of happiness within the U.S. Change slides. So under Mill's utilitarianism, there could be efforts to maximize happiness by reevaluating harsh sentences for crimes committed, and for those still in prison taking steps to create more humane living conditions for people within the American prison system. Another way would to remedy mass incarceration under Mill is offering parole sooner to prisoners for nonviolent crimes, creating better conditions, and to transform the prison system into a place of rehabilitation and to help the prisoner onto the correct path to rejoin society instead of just a for-profit thing. Change slides, and that's the end.